Welcome to our webinar Wednesday, Creating Safe Spaces for Vulnerable Youth. I'm Sandra Frericks, a Science Education Specialist at the University of Nebraska and part of the Click to Science PD team. I'm looking forward to having some great conversations today, and we're going to ask you to share your ideas with us and get engaged. With me, I have Michelle Crable from Nebraska 4-H. Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion and dialogue today that we're going to have regarding young people who may have some challenges in their lives, and so we'll have some interesting conversation around that. I am the Youth Development Specialist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I work in our 4-H Youth Development Office, so I'm excited to be a part of this, and I've worked in a variety of after-school settings and with a variety of youth who may fit in that vulnerable populations kind of category.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing your expertise in positive youth development to our webinar today. I think it's really going to add to our conversation. Our focus in today's webinar will be learning to recognize the vulnerable youth who are in your programs and what they need to feel safe in after-school time. We'll explore what we can learn from research on vulnerable youth and what it means to create a safe space. And I'm going to start today with a poll to get some input from you about who the vulnerable youth are in your program. A little bit about the youth in your program, and it looks like there's lots of agreement that there are certain populations in this vulnerable youth list that we serve pretty universally. Immigrant youth and English language learners are in all of our programs. Youth experiencing poverty and youth with a challenging or unstable home life are in all the programs that we're serving today. And we also have a lot of programs that are serving youth with physical or mental disabilities or LGBTQ youth. So it looks like you're recognizing a lot of different vulnerable youth who are in your program, and we're really happy to see that. I'll give you just another minute or two to respond, and I want to make some notes here so I remember what you said so we can come back to this data.
I'm going to pop in here as Sandra is writing. If there are any specific questions you have about working with a specific population, feel free to type into the chat box to ask those questions. We're going to be talking really looking at creating safe spaces for vulnerable youth through a positive youth development lens today, but we certainly welcome any questions that you have throughout the course of the webinar in regarding some of your experiences or maybe even some pointers that you have about working with youth in these various populations. Again, feel free to use the chat box or to address those questions or to type in suggestions as well.
Thank you so much for your participation today. Looks like there's still people doing the poll, so I'm going to leave it up for just a little bit more. And I just want to share with you kind of where we're coming from a little bit. Vulnerable populations are those youth in your program that are exposed to high risk and developmental, emotional, mental, physical, and social dimensions. It's important to remember that youth may be vulnerable in more than one way. And, but we also want to take a critical look at the terms vulnerable youth or vulnerable populations and at-risk youth, because those terms are very deficit-oriented. And the approach we're going to take today is more to focus on a strengths-based approach based in positive youth development. And Michelle will help us understand really what that looks like for the youth in our program and how we can support youth in developing their strengths. Thanks so much for engaging with us as we get started today on the poll, and we're going to ask you to keep engaging in a lot of different ways throughout the webinar. I'll put this away now and turn it over to Michelle for a little bit to talk to us about positive youth development.
So as Sandra just mentioned, the term vulnerable population, and I will say that a group of scholars at USDA NIFA, which is where 4-H headquarters is founded, and so the work that I've been involved in is really around working with my 4-H colleagues throughout the nation at other land-grant universities. But the language that we've been working with and with around vulnerable populations is 4-H's work to kind of expand our audience and to really make sure we're serving all young people. And so one of the reasons that I think one of the issues that came up as scholars was the issue of vulnerable populations is really about kind of a deficit model. And positive youth development is a strengths-based model. We have one of Richard Lerner's who was at Tufts University. His kind of model, you may have heard him talk about it as the 5 C's. You can see some things that might look familiar if you're familiar with the developmental assets out of the Search Institute. There's a variety of different kind of strength-based positive youth development models out there. But we want to think about the vulnerable populations comes under attack from PYD scholars in the sense that it is deficit-based. So we really want to think and focus today our efforts on thinking about young people that may be experiencing poverty, who may be experiencing homelessness, who may be struggling with their sexual identity, how we can look at it through the lens of a strengths base. So as you can see on this model that we have up here, a young person has individual strengths. They have ecological assets, which include family, community, schools. It may be extended family. It may be businesses. And then Lerner talks about how that is connected to PYD, or positive youth development, which is really helping a young person develop into a caring, capable citizen. And so we see that Lerner says young people need connection, competence, confidence, caring, and character. And then if they get those things, they'll be able to make contributions to their to society or to their communities. And we're also going to see reduced risk behavior. The other part to this model is this takes time. So young people do not develop overnight, as you're very well aware of, but this takes time over many, many years. This process looks pretty simple up here on the model, but we know that it can get pretty messy in real life, and we also know that it takes a fair amount of time as well. So when we're looking today, or when we're talking about various populations, again, youth who may be homeless, youth who maybe have an incarcerated parent, or that they themselves may have some experience with the juvenile justice system, we want to really focus on what strengths that they have. We want to look at it through that lens so we can help all young people grow and develop to their potential. So the other part to this is when we, as informal education, provide programming, we want to make sure that all young people are truly valued, which is an important part of positive youth development. And certainly we want to provide the best quality program we can deliver for them. We know through some of our research with Lerner that our relationship with a caring adult can negate some of the issues that a young person might be facing, and so some of the challenges that they might be facing. So we know that connection with a caring adult is important. And also we know that our staff and whoever you're working with or volunteers deserve to have resources and training to do the best possible job they can for young people, which really is about creating a safe place, a place of belonging, so we can get to the place where young people feel connected, where they can develop some competencies, where they can gain confidence, they can develop character, they can become caring, and ultimately contribute to their kind of culture as well as to the larger parts of society. So this is the model that we're working with. Again, it's strengths-based, and we know that quality after-school programming, which uses the positive youth development model, certainly can impact the lives of young people. So this is a really loaded question about what statistics tell us about vulnerable youth, and we just kind of pulled some pieces today from a variety of sources. One thing I will say about this that makes when we try to categorize, well, what youth is in what category, often you may have a young person who may be in multiple categories. So the young person may be experiencing poverty, but then they also may be experiencing they may have some exposure to the juvenile justice system. Or you may have someone who has a mental health issue and they may be experiencing some homelessness. Or you may have someone who is questioning their sexual identity and may have experiences with mental health issues. So know that some of these categories, a youth may be in a variety of the categories. So just some real statistics that kind of stood out for us, and I got this last week when I was at a national meeting, was that over 70,000 youth are incarcerated in the United States. And that, to me, is mind-boggling. We also had some information, also in the same presentation that I went to, that approximately 1 in 5 youth aged 13 to 18 experience a severe mental health disorder at some point in their life. And I think that is amazing to me that we're talking about 20%. And then for children who are a little bit younger, the average is about 13%. So certainly there's some significant mental health issues that young people are facing. One of the statistics that some of the scholars through at this 4-H meeting I was at said that 37% of youth with mental health conditions age 14 and older drop out of school. And their research they were citing said it was the highest dropout rate of any disability group. So probably many of you know that mental health is an issue, and so certainly this highlights that. LGB youth, this was a report done by the National Institute of Health, kind of did a massive lit review, and I will say this up front, their findings were highlighting some of the research that's been done over the last 20 years or so. They talk about research only in LGB, so gay, lesbian, bisexual. Transgenders, they do not talk about because there's not significant research done on the transgender group to kind of report those findings. So LGB youth report experiencing delays, experiencing elevated levels of harassment, victimization, and violence. They are more likely to report feeling unsafe at school and receive lower grades. So that is one particular piece that we need to, the young people who are questioning their sexual identity are dealing with. And the LGBT youth are at a higher risk for substance abuse and homelessness as well. Youth who have fewer financial resources or youth who come from lower income families engage in more risky behaviors during adolescence. Only 1 in 10 youth from low-income families graduate from a 4-year college. 1 in 5 youth from low-income families are charged with an adult crime by the age of 24, and low-income youth are less likely to be involved in extracurricular activities than middle and high-income families. There's been some interesting work done around that that's saying extracurricular activities is really where young people learn skills that make them marketable in the workforce. These are just a few statistics. We could spend a half a day talking about the statistics, of various vulnerable youth populations, but this is just to give us some idea that young people who may fit in one of these categories, there are some specific risks that they face. The good news is out of the LGBT literature or research, they found that young people who had a caring adult that they could identify with or they felt safe with helped kind of negate some of the negative or the risk factors, some of the issues that they were facing that kind of, if they felt like a young person was being harassed, that experience with an adult kind of helped, kind of cancel out some of the experiences with their negative experiences with peers or with others. So that's the exciting part, is that we do know that a relationship with a caring adult does matter.
Thanks, Michelle. That message that we can really make a difference in our after-school programs, that's really encouraging to me. And that's kind of the reason we're doing this webinar today, because we know that after-school programs can really impact these vulnerable youth in positive ways. And we want to be sure that our program, the youth in our programs, have every advantage possible, and that our staff do too, that they can be prepared to work with these youth. We're going to pull an activity from one of the resources we have that you can download for the webinar. This is called Four Corners, and it is from the Creating Safe Spaces for LGBTQ Youth, the toolkit, and it has a lot of great resources. This was one that I thought would be a great activity for us to do in the webinar context. So I have some more polls I'm going to pull up, and what I want you to do is just take a moment to respond to these polls and share your opinion on these issues. Now, trying to get the right ones. Sorry, let me try one more time on my polls. Identify their values and feel able to talk about their values and behave in ways that are consistent with their values and respecting the values of others. In a in-person workshop or working directly with youth, you would want to establish some ground rules about how to have discussions like this, and there's great resources in the toolkit to do that. In our case, your responses are confidential, so we're just going to ask you to look at these statements and decide if you agree, disagree, or you're not sure about these statements. And I do want to encourage everyone to participate. Your response is confidential, but the goal here is to think about what your values are and whether you're behaving in a way that is consistent with the values that you have. I'll give you a moment to respond. People that haven't had a chance to respond yet, so I'll leave it up for just another minute. What I want you to think about as we look at the polls is to look at, let me broadcast those results so you can do this. Look at the polls and think about how your opinion fits with the opinions of the rest of the people in the group. I want you to think about whether you're surprised by how many people have the same or different opinions from you. And if you do want to comment on that, you can share some ideas in the chat box about whether you agree or disagree with other people. My whole screen just changed. Melissa, are you doing something to my webinar? Thank you. Okay, I have a couple more polls to put up with you, so just give me a minute to get those up, and we'll get your opinion on a couple more issues. As you're looking at these and looking at how your opinion fits with the other people in the group, and it looks like these are a little bit, we're not all in agreement, and that's okay. We did not try to select these in a way that everyone would have a particular opinion. But again, I want you to look at how your opinion fits with the rest of the people in your group. And I also want you to think about whether an activity like this would be helpful for the staff in your program to think about how their values are reflected in the program that they have for youth. Again, this resource comes from the Creating Safe Spaces for LGBTQ Youth, a toolkit. And it is specifically designed to think about issues for LGBTQ youth, but I want to remind you that as we've been talking about vulnerable youth, there's a lot of different dimensions about the circumstances that can make youth vulnerable, and the strategies that we use to help them are not as unique as the different circumstances they may be facing that create vulnerabilities in their lives. So the strategies that help everyone feel safe and comfortable in our program work across all those different groups. I'm going to go ahead and hide these polls and then turn it back over to Michelle to think about how we can create a safe space for the youth in our program. I would love to hear any comments you have in the chat box about this activity, or whether you think it would be helpful for the staff in your program to have an experience like this, to think about what their values are and how those are reflected in the program you have for youth. And you might think of different statements that would be really useful for your staff, and you can share those in the chat box as well. Thanks for playing along with that activity.
As we think about this, I would be curious to know, and I'm going to ask you to type into the chat box, what kind of interactions do you have with young people? So are you directors, project directors? Are you after-school workers? Are you working in faith communities? What are some of the ways that you are interacting with young people? And then we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. But take some time just to answer my question, because I'm a little bit curious to know what what role you are serving youth with. Another thing that I'm going to kind of toss this question back to you. Like you have a variety of experiences of either working directly with youth or you're working with volunteers who work with youth. So thank you for giving me that feedback. I'm going to open this question for you. Simply respond to the question on the title slide. What does it mean to create a safe space for youth in your work? And then we'll talk a little bit about what the research says. So if you want to take a few minutes for what does it mean to create a safe space for youth in your work, I would appreciate hearing your answers. Thank you for your responses. I really appreciate what you have to say here. And what it looks like to me as I read through this, I see the word judgment-free. I see welcoming and inclusive, not being judged, inclusive environment where they can learn collaboratively, making students feel secure, comfortable enough to be themselves. I also see Sandra talks a little bit about youth have been kind of quieted all day long in a traditional school day, but an opportunity to maybe move around a little bit more, to be a little bit louder in their conversation or to even have conversation. Again, a safe learning environment, a welcoming space, how to handle rooming discreetly as needed, also use of neutral pronouns. We're going to talk about some of these things. So all of your responses are really spot on with some of the pieces that I read in preparation for today. And I did take a lot from some LGBTQ youth kind of safe space toolkits, and I'm going to give you kind of my top 10. It's our next slide. Our top 10 things to create a safe space. And I think some of these are pretty simple. I will say this, there's nothing maybe rocket science about this, but it's really about how do you implement that. So I'll kind of quickly go through this, and maybe we have, then we'll have some opportunity to discuss how you go about doing that or what's tricky. One of the first thing is to assess our own values. So Sandra led us in an activity today about assessing our own values. So, I'm just going to play around with this, give you some examples. What is your view on homelessness? What is your view or what is your value in regards to the juvenile justice system? What is your value on mental health issues? So knowing some of your own values, if you bring stereotypes or prejudice in to working with young people, to kind of reevaluate that. Take some time for some self-reflection to think about your own values. The next one is that I think is really important, and this may seem really obvious, but I think it's really important, is posting statements declaring that all are welcome. And so especially in the LGBTQ youth safe space pieces that I was reading, talked about that rainbow triangle that is posted outside of a door does make a difference. And I kind of really wondered if that really worked, but every different article I read says yes, it does have an impact, that a young person knows if they wanted to have additional conversation that they could. So it may be a simple statement that you just say all are welcome. Or maybe you write all are welcome in another language to really kind of extend a welcome to people whose English language is not their first language or their primary language. So this idea that language and visual cues matter do. And so that's really what the second point is about. Using inclusive language was mentioned in the chat box, so thank you, Kim, for doing that, especially in the issue around gender identity with transgendered use. This is where you might ask what pronoun you should use. Some people have gone to using they more or their more instead of a male or a female pronoun, but looking at your inclusive language so that it's not only the issue around gender, but identity, it's also around English language learners or immigrant populations. What are you using? Or I often think about some of our families have limited literacy rates, so how are you providing language that they can read and understand? So using language that really doesn't exclude, both kind of in the written and spoken spheres, but to think about what kind of language it's inclusive. And that can be about religion, it can be about race. There's a variety of ways to look at inclusive language. The next kind of thing to create a safe space is training yourself and or your staff or your volunteers about myths and stereotypes. And if you are doing or responsible for some volunteer training or staff development training, you may want to talk about what are some myths of homeless youth, what are some myths about youth who are incarcerated, what are myths about youth who experience poverty, what are maybe some stereotypes, and to really delve into what does the research say, what do we know, what might be the context of that, about that. So really 4 is really about kind of really understanding the context of some of these various populations, because when you start hearing some stories or working with young people, some of their experiences are really amazing. And I know when I was teaching public school, I had some youth who chronically missed school while they were doing child care. And it was a very poor family, that financially poor family, that was experiencing that. I understood a little bit more once I understood the context of the situation. So there's several ways you can educate yourself about that. Number 5 is utilizing the resources of youth. Youth provide a lot of great insights into some of the things that they are, obviously about their experiences, but they can really help us create a safe space. Have them provide some leadership. Have them be a part of the solution. Draw upon their experiences, their knowledges, their insight to help you create that safe space. Along that, in the positive youth development world, we talk a lot about youth-adult partnerships, where adults and youth work together to maybe work on a particular situation or work in partnership for a particular organization or a group. Develop those youth-adult partnerships where young people are learning from adults, adults are learning and working with youth, and have that be a part of your kind of tools to help you create a safe space. The other thing that I think is extremely important is hiring a diverse staff. If you're going to be working, and I'm going to specifically talk about if you're going to be working with, let's say, some racial minorities or some immigrant minorities, it's often good to have staff that can speak the language, who understand the culture. So hiring a diverse staff to meet the needs of our diverse youth is also important. Piece number 8 that I really think is important, some of these young people that we work with are experiencing really some really serious issues. And I often think, wow, at 15 you're dealing with, and it's important as a professional. I consider myself an educator, not a therapist or a counselor, but when I might need to seek help for a young person, do I think that they're in harm's way, either caused by someone else or maybe potentially caused by themselves? Who do I refer to help, and how do I get help for that young person? So I think it's really important that if a young person makes a comment about suicide, we explain to the youth that we will need to report that to proper authorities to get help for young people. It's really important to know if a young person discloses they're a victim of sexual assault or child abuse, that we seek help for that young person. Or if we think a young person may potentially be suicidal, that we also, again, seek out those resources for a young person. So I can't emphasize, is really important to know resources and know when to make those referrals. Number 9 seems really simple. This could just simply say, don't allow harassment of any kind, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, in your programming space. There's no room for put-downs. There's no room for degrading comments. There's no room for any of that in any of our programs. If we're going to be safe and inclusive, we just can't have any kinds of harassment. And my last my tip for creating a safe space is be ready to listen to youth. One of the biggest pieces that I read in the LGBTQ safe space manuals that I was reading was just be ready to listen to young people. And it may be that they are experiencing a parent who is an alcoholic. It may be that they got arrested for drinking alcohol or substance abuse or whatever the case may be. But be ready to listen to youth, to issues that concern them, whether it's simply, I don't have any place to live, or our family is hungry. Be ready to listen. Not providing judgment is important. Caring about that person will make a difference. And that's that relationship with a positive adult. The other piece to talk about with point number 10 is respecting confidentiality and knowing when you need to break that in case of a youth may harm themselves or they might harm another person. So it's important to remind youth that you will be confidential, but confidentiality can be broken when those issues around safety are concerned, again, for the well-being of others as well as the well-being of themselves. These are my top 10. I'm going to ask you real quickly in the chat box to see if you would add anything else for creating a safe space. About the list. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate be the role model that you would like others to be. That is a great point. And I think sometimes it's as simple as, how do you want to be treated? What is a safe space for me? When I think about in my own life, I really do think about what makes a safe space for me. And it's a lot of these things. I want to feel like I'm included. I want to feel like I'm going to be respected. Those are really important things for me. And Kim, well, I'm anxious to hear your comment as I see that you're typing. But if anyone else has any thing that they would like to add to this list, I would love to hear your ideas. But really, a lot of this comes down to it's pretty simple to do some of these things, or these ideas seem pretty simple. Sometimes implementing them can really be hard. And so really encourage you to think about how you might do this. Have this conversation if you have volunteers or staff about how you might go about doing that. Kim, I really like your point here is that we are all learning and we make mistakes. When I started out my classroom experiences teaching back, I'm not going to tell you the date, but one of the things that it was the Jim Fay, if anybody's familiar with Jim Fay behavior, it was somebody who studied under him, and she was saying, oh, I use this method, it works really great, And then she said, there was a day I just lost it. And she said, I kind of lost it in front of this entire lunchroom full of youth. And I looked at her, and I was a first-year teacher, and I thought, oh, even she loses it. It's okay to make mistakes. And I think sometimes we get tied up or we get nervous about making sure everything's right. And we do want to have high standards and quality for ourselves, but sometimes we make mistakes. And to give yourself permission to make some mistakes. And again, use youth to kind of keep you in check about what mistakes you might be making and have them help maybe correct you if you need it. So good point. So what we're going to talk a little bit about, when you look at these, the strategies, we want to think about young people, and positive youth development also does this, is thinks about the youth in kind of all areas. So whether it's around safety, whether it's around physical health, mental health and wellness, social, emotional, cognitive, and economic. And we certainly know that economics really can impact a lot of these things. That we have, the young person is kind of at the center of this model. We see all these things that come into play, but we know that community and family and public systems and public policy interplay here too. So what I want us to think about is there are many, many ways we can create a safe space for young people, whether that's in our programs, whether that's being an advocate at a policy perspective, whether that's creating our own families where our young person feels safe and feels valued. But really, again, with positive youth development, we want to think about the child in a holistic perspective. If they don't feel safe at home, how might that impact your programming? If their physical health is maybe not optimal, how might that impact their well-being or their health? So again, to think about young people in a holistic way, I think, is extremely important and a part of the positive youth development model.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We're going to take a moment to watch a video from Click to Science PD. And this video is called Promoting a Positive Climate, and it focuses on creating a safe space for youth. As you're watching the video, I have a couple of questions for you to think about. Pay attention to the specific actions that you see in the video or the policies that the program has, and think about how those policies or actions help create a safe space. And also think about the role that youth have in creating a safe space. That it's not entirely something that's under our control as the adults in the program, but youth also have an impact on this. We're going to pull up some chat boxes after the video, so you'll have an opportunity to share some ideas. So do think about these questions as we pull up the video. I'll start the video in just a moment, and I do want you to let me know whether you can hear the audio in the chat box, please. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks.
Do one of you guys want to read the agreements? Okay, let's have Judith.
Be safe. Be safe. Be respectful. Be respectful. Be responsible. Be responsible. Have fun. Have fun.
In this video, you'll see many examples of the adult helping youth to create a safe space as they begin each activity. Throughout the activity, listen for ways that staff models appropriate positive behavior, speech, and attitudes. Notice how they reflect back to the group agreement to maintain a safe and fun place.
Kayla, come up. So, like always, we do with all of our activities, we are going to be starting the activity with the agreements.
We have agreements instead of rules. We talk to the students about what can we do during this time to make our rooms safe.
Be responsible. Use materials appropriately.
Our 4 core agreements are be safe, be respectful, be responsible, and have fun.
Before we start, how can we be safe in this environment? Because we are working with bleachers and uneven spaces. So how can we be safe? Yes.
By not running up and down the bleachers.
Exactly. So can everyone agree on that? Not running up and down the bleachers?
Where should everyone that's watching whoever's testing be going? TJ.
They should be respectful.
Awesome. So while other people are testing the boats, please stay seated.
Eliza, can you come up and lead our debrief, please?
They debrief, where they ask students what they enjoyed about the activity, what they would like to do, if they were able to accomplish their goal.
What other question would you like to answer about structures? Structures? Yeah.
All of those things we work on to ensure that our students have a safe, fun, and caring environment.
I see the video was a little bit challenging for some people. I will post a link in the box in just a minute so you can connect directly to that video. But first I want to pull up the chat pods here and give you a chance to share some things that you observed during the video. What are the things that we can do to create a safe space for you? So please share your comments in the chat pod and I'll share the link to that video. Thank you so much to everyone for your contribution. I noted that we have some new people who have just joined us, and we are getting close to the end of the webinar today, but the recording of the full webinar will be posted on the Click to Science website. So if you didn't see the first part, you can come back and check that out. And also for those of you that the video was a bit problematic, when you go back and view the recording, it'll be much easier to see the video and even to see what people are sharing in the chat boxes, because you can always pause the recording and take some time to look at the great ideas that people are posting in the chat box. And we will share these back out also on the Click to Science website, because we have some really good strategies about how we can help youth develop a connection to one another and to adults in our program, how we can help them develop their sense of competence and confidence as we're working with them in the after-school program. Part of this is by creating a safe space for youth, but also it's about the activities that we provide for them and how those activities contribute to their development as well. I'm going to put the chat boxes away for now, but I want to thank everyone for their contribution. Go ahead.
As Sandra is doing this, I just wanted to mention that I was reading your comments in the various chat pods, and what I think was interesting was the word agreement struck with several of you. It also struck something with me as well. An agreement, several of you said like that, it felt more positive. It also really implies a relationship. That when you agree upon something, it's really about having that relationship. It's a two-party piece versus a rule, where a rule feels like one person has done something and you just have to follow it. So I think that's an important piece to think about. Again, it is about building relationships to help young people feel like they belong.
I would love to have people share in our main chat box here. What are some strategies that you think are important for youth in your program in terms of creating this safe space and making it inclusive for all youth and supporting all the youth that come to our program, no matter where they're coming from? We've had a lot of different strategies that we've talked about today, but I'm not sure I've heard strategies that you have found particularly working with immigrant youth or English language learners. When we did our poll at the beginning, a lot of people were working with those youth in their programs. What are the specific strategies that you've learned that are really effective in making your program welcoming and safe for immigrant youth or youth without strong English language skills? And also, are there specific things that are important to include when you're working with youth in poverty? A lot of us have youth that have challenging or unstable home lives or youth who are experiencing poverty. How do we make those youth feel safe in our programs? I know we're running out of time, but I am going to pause for just a moment so that you can share some strategies, because I think this is really important for us to learn from one another. What can we do to really reach out to these specific vulnerable youth who are in our programs? Bottom line.
The bottom line to me is really simple, Sandra, is all youth are unique. We're all going to develop in our own ways. I'm still developing as an adult. Young people certainly develop in their own unique ways. I have here, all youth need a positive relationship with an adult and a place to belong. I think I could take the word youth out of there and just say, as humans, we all need positive relationships and we need a place to belong. So that's our charge. It's simple. Implementing it can be challenging, but that's really at the heart of our work, is to respect young people for their uniquenesses, to help them develop, and to be that safe, caring, positive relationship as an adult that we have to be for young people, and providing them an environment where they feel like they can belong.
Thanks so much for joining us, Michelle. You really added a lot to our webinar today, and I appreciate so much your expertise that you bring along. I also want to make a couple of quick shout-outs as we finish up today to the great people that we talked to at conferences this month in Kansas, Florida, Wyoming, and at the NAE 4HA conference in New Orleans. Some great connections, and if any of you are joining us from one of those states, we sure are glad to have you, and welcome to Click to Science PD. Our next webinar Wednesday will be November 16th. The topic is maximizing your space, and we're going to have another guest next month from the We Cook program to talk about how they make the best use of space in the after-school programs where they work, and how they can maximize that space for learning. In the meantime, do connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Pinterest to get lots of ideas about how to make STEM click. I want to thank you all for joining us today. In a few days, we'll have the recording of this webinar posted on the Click to Science website, so you can look for it there and share it with colleagues that weren't able to join us today. As you leave the webinar, we're going to send you to a survey. We hope that survey is working. We've had some issue with our server today, but we want your input about how this webinar met your expectations and what we could do in the future to help make subtopics that are really useful for you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate all of your input in the webinar. Thank you.